this is Sean, and what I'm working on today is my 2000 Saturn SW2. And the problem I have with this car is I drove it to the beach for a scuba diving trip maybe a couple months ago, and the transmission just exploded on it. So it doesn't go into gear, it makes all kinds of racket, and the transmission's gone on this thing. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to replace it, and let me show you what I've got going on here. My garage is a mess. I've been trying to reorganize and clean things up, and so stuff is just kind of sitting everywhere. But I do have a transmission that will work in that car, and I had pulled the valve body off of that, thinking another Saturn had a bad valve body, and so I think I've got it. I think that's it right there. So I'm going to get that back together. But I also wanted to take this opportunity to tell you guys the story of how I got into mechanicking, and it has all to do with Saturns. And so look at all these Saturn parts I've got. I've got fender brackets, alternator, clutches. I've got intake manifolds. I've got a couple, these are both 5-speed manual transmissions here. And then I've also got just a whole collection of all the bolts and relays and things that go all over the place on different Saturns. There's a neutral safety switch. I've got airbags. That's a computer from something else. That's a water pump pulley right there. Got all kinds of miscellaneous Saturn bolts. I've got some other valve bodies in here. Look at that. Okay, and there's a cover for a transmission too. I've got flex plates in here. I've got center caps. There's all the change I've ever found in broken down cars. Got fuel rails. So let me tell you all the story of how I turned into somewhat of a mechanic. And I'm going to use this transmission repair to tell you all the story. Alright, I got the Saturn in the garage here, and I kind of made a little spot where I could back it in. I could have moved some stuff around and gotten it in a little bit further, but I think it's okay just the way it is. And so got some tools hanging and kind of like organized and everything. And I've also got my tool chest here with a bunch of stuff in it. So I'm gonna get started on this. This story starts in 2007 when I graduated from grad school, and I was in North Carolina at the time, and I decided that I didn't want to be in North Carolina anymore. And so I have family in Colorado, and I decided that I was going to move out there and see how I made out there in Colorado. And at the time, I had a 2005 Nissan Frontier. And for whatever reason, I had never driven a Saturn before, but I had seen them around, and knew people who had them. And for whatever reason, I felt like I needed a Saturn, and I wanted a 5-speed. So the only 5-speeds I had ever driven were trucks. And I pretty much just taught myself how to drive them. And so I ended up finding a 1996 SW2, a Saturn, a 5-speed. And that was probably about 2007 as well. And I bought that. And I was driving that around with no problems. And what ended up happening was I was going to look at my gray F-250. You may remember seeing it. And I was changing the oil on the Saturn. And what ended up happening is I was in a hurry and I forgot to tighten up the oil plug. And so I blew the engine on that 96. Now that actually worked out pretty well for me because I bought another Saturn wagon and one that needed a bunch of work. I picked up this red Saturn wagon, but I kept my original Saturn in the yard just kind of as a constant reminder of my mistake. And eventually the city got on me about getting rid of it, and so that's where we're at. There was a story a few years ago about this guy who bought this Saturn, and he was just going on in this article complaining about how it ruined his whole life, and he just one problem after another, and he was a victim and everything else. And so this is a very similar, I couldn't find that story, but this is a very similar one from 2010. And this guy goes on and on too, and he says how he bought this Saturn. Now he bought it from a dealership that went out of business and this and that. But anyway, he says the Saturn broke down and it cost him his job, and then he's trying to walk to work and everything else, and just all this and that. And it's very interesting because my story when I blew my engine was very different. And instead of crying about it, which I did do, instead I basically ran out of options. I cried about it. I had nothing else to do. So I'm like, okay, well, I guess I need to fix it. So where guys like this are over here crying about all their misfortune, I went through and I found a Saturn forum and a bunch of guys and girls who really liked helping others. And so I took it as an opportunity to learn something and to roll my sleeves up and get it done. And you all remember that Simpsons episode where Homer says there's a crisis, and Lisa says the Japanese have the same word for crisis as opportunity, and Homer says, yeah, crisis-opportunity. So this was really my crisis-opportunity. And it's interesting to me to read some of this stuff because my reaction to a car breaking down or to a mistake I made was very different than this. Instead of going online and crying about it and asking for donations and GoFundMe, I researched, rolled up my sleeves, and tried to figure out how to fix my mistake. And so I ended up like doing struts and brakes, and a friend of mine helped me with the clutch on that one. And I just did a bunch of stuff to it. It had a lot of miles on it, and they were more like small projects, I guess. But I ended up doing a bunch of work to that one. And that kind of just like got me thinking, maybe I can replace the engine on this Saturn. And so at some point, I pulled the trigger on a junkyard engine. And so I was like, okay, I'm gonna go ahead and get this engine and see what happens. And so what I ended up doing, I ended up going to the junkyard and watching a guy take this engine out of this Saturn, this parts car. And I didn't know really any of the parts or a lot of that stuff. So I felt like watching him take that out while he was doing it could be beneficial to me. And he was lucky, or I was lucky enough, and he was kind enough to let me watch him at this junkyard. He had this thing up on a lift and everything and was jerking all over the place and all that good stuff. So he got the engine out. I got it in the back of my truck. I'll see if I can find some pictures of that for you. Here is the engine that I went and got from a junkyard. This was when I was living in Colorado still. And in the back of the truck there is my new engine hoist that I had bought to go with this. And so here I had it all assembled and had the engine out of the truck and just hanging there. Took a couple pictures. And I pretty much went ahead and locked myself in my garage. And I think it was like 16 hours later, I had my engine replaced in that. And so that was definitely a really, really cool feeling, replacing an engine in a vehicle. And so not long after that, I ended up moving back to North Carolina to take a teaching job. I was doing the real estate thing out in Colorado, and I wanted to continue doing that, but I had a job at a consulting firm. I was an aquatic ecologist and working 40 hours a week, and that just wasn't really working for me. And so I ended up moving back to North Carolina to take a teaching job. And came back here, and I didn't really have a whole... I just had a lot of time on my hands. And so I ended up thinking, okay, if I did this Saturn thing with my car, maybe I could buy another one and with a bad engine and do it again. And so that's what I ended up doing. I bought another Saturn that had a blown engine, found another junkyard engine, and replaced it in my spare time and sold it. And so that's kind of how that whole thing started. So let me show you some pictures of different things from those early days working on Saturns. Here are a few Saturn photos that I wanted to show you. I've got thousands and thousands. But you can see here, I was buying cars in almost any condition. This thing was pretty much just a trunk lid, a door, and a rear bumper cover. This was another wagon that I bought, and you can see my old truck in the background. I was even selling bolts and hardware. I had a guy from Colorado call me and ask me about all the hardware he needed, so I dug through everything and labeled it for him. There's a 95 wagon. There's a car getting ready to go to the parts. There's a fifth gear stack that I was talking about. There's that same car getting ready to go to the junkyard. I had all kinds of body parts and panels and covers and everything. And I was always dragging home every conceivable aspect of Saturns. There's another bunch of fifth gear stacks. I must have had a pretty good day at the junkyard that day. So there's a wagon going to the junkyard. There's 3 Saturns in that shot. Oh, and I had a collection of owner's manuals going too, and you can see the biology GRE study guide right there. I took that way back in 2004, I guess. There's one of the junkyards I go to. They always knew me as Sean the Saturn guy. There's another wagon that I picked up. That's my old 96, and then I was doing a engine swap, I guess, on that one. There's a black coupe that I drove for a while, and then I had this green 96 wagon. I had that registered on the road for a while too. And looks like I'm pulling an engine out of a car there, and I used to like to pull the car up over the engine and wheel it out of the way. This was a Saturn that I bought when I first moved back to North Carolina, and I went and got it and picked it up. I think I paid $400 for it, and it had a ticking in the engine, and all it was the motor mount. So that was like a sweet deal. There's another Saturn that I picked up, and I think I drove this one for a while too. There's my old 96 right there, and there's another Saturn. And in Colorado, you can double trailer, so a lot of times I would double trailer these things when I would go to pick them up. There's another wagon. And this is so one of the things that Saturn did is they marketed and produced a right-hand drive for the rural postal carriers. And so this is a right-hand drive wagon. If you can find one of these things are solid gold. So I was always looking for right-hand drive wagons. And then this was that black coupe that I drove for a while when I lived in Colorado. And I drove this back and forth to Colorado a few times. Oh, and then I sold this car to a girl, and then I did some work on it, and she thought I was pretty cool working on her car, so we became friends. And I was, I guess, visiting her in Colorado one time, so I got a picture of both our coupes. They were both 2002s, I think, or 2001s. If you can find a Saturn with a black roof, these are special editions. So this is called a White Hot edition. It's got black badges, it's got the black roof on it. That's a very special Saturn right there. And there's my old black coupe in the background. There's another wagon I picked up. And here, this is my old house in North Carolina. You can see I've got like 1, 2, 3, and possibly 4 engines. And I don't know what I was doing with that wagon, or that sedan. But I had parts all over the place all the time. There's another 5th gear. Oh, and then this was a funny story. I woke up one morning and I called my girlfriend. This was 2013. And I called my girlfriend and I said, I'm broke. And she said, okay. And she came over later that day, and I had this wagon and I had this sedan in the yard, and I had one more Saturn. So I picked up 3 Saturns by the time she came over. And she found out that I wasn't a complainer, I was a doer. And she's like, what is this guy? Who is this guy? Like, he complains that he's got no money, and then he's got 3 cars he's working on. And so I got started, whichever one needed the least amount of work to get it sold. I got started on that one and then just went down the line. I've got the car jacked up here, and what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to take the wheels off to give myself a little bit better clearance and then get my jack stands under there. But if you really look closely at this Saturn, you'll notice that it's got 2002 Saturn Coupe wheels, and those are the only year those were available. And it's also got black badges. So this is definitely a true Saturn fan. Saturn. Now I've got both front wheels removed. I've got the car squarely supported by 2 jack stands. And I personally like to leave the jack in place and locked. So not only do I have a jack stand, but I have a jack in there as well. I've got the parking brake on, and I've got the wheels chalked on both sides. So you definitely want to be extra conscientious when you're working under a vehicle. Next, what I want to work on is starting the transmission fluid draining. So that's your transmission plug right there. That's a 15. So I'm going to go ahead and pull that and start it draining while I work up on the top. Okay, that's draining. I'm gonna let that do its thing while I continue working on the top up here. Now what I need to do is take all this out. So I want to get the caliper out of here, the drive shaft, the knuckle, the strut, everything. So all this is going to come out of here. So let me work on that for a minute. And I'll keep talking about what happened with my 96. Getting back to my 96 and replacing the engine, I had done brakes and struts and just stuff like that before, but never anything anywhere near an engine. And when you start reading the directions on how to replace things, they'll start to say things like unplug the neutral safety switch, unplug the EGR valve, disconnect the transmission coolant sensor. And I didn't know what any of that stuff was. And so what I ended up doing was I would just disconnect things and I would label them. And so I would say, okay, this is a bunch of wires on the top of the transmission. And I would put a tag, piece of tape with a number on there and label it. Or I would say, this is a black and blue wire, and I would label it with a number and then put a label right there as well. And so don't let the fact that you don't know what these things are called, like, it doesn't matter what this thing is called. I know how to unplug it and plug it back in. So just because I don't know what it is and how it works doesn't mean I can't replace it. And so I spent a lot of time documenting what was going on and where I was unplugging things and plugging them back. And so that made a huge difference for me for getting that first engine done. As far as getting started on that engine replacement back in 2009, a lot of the directions on how to do engines will include things like disconnect the neutral safety switch, unplug the EGR sensor, disconnect the engine coolant temperature sensor. And I didn't know what any of those things were. But at the end of the day, if it's an electrical connector and you can unplug it and plug it back in, that's all that really matters. And so don't let the directions on things like that intimidate you if you don't know exactly what everything is called, because you can disconnect things and reconnect them after you've put your new engine in there. So it's not super intimidating as it might sound by reading the directions on these things. Check out this guy. I haven't used this thing in years and years and years. Wonder how I'm gonna get it out of here. Here is the Saturn fans forum that I've taken a ton of information from. And so I was really active here way back when I was working on stuff. And so this is the forum right here, the S series forum that I would be working in. And here is the how-to library. And so basically what I was doing is I was coming in here, and when I had a new car, I would ask people, okay, I'm working on a 2000 whatever, and it's doing this, and they would tell me how to fix it. And so they were really helping me out, and everybody could tell that I was just working on cars all the time. And so what I would do is I would take the job that I had and I would write it up as a how-to article. And back then it was about how-to articles instead of how-to videos. And so I was trying to give back to the community by just writing up really good informational how-to guides on whatever job I was working on. And so when you come in here, and I just clicked on this, there's still a ton of my stuff in here. And see, this was the Saturn that I bought after I blew the engine, and I was replacing the fuel pump, I think, here. And so not only was I taking a lot from this forum, but I was trying to give back as well by doing all these different how-to articles on the different jobs that I was having. And so really trying to give back and make the relationship sustainable. And so I made a ton of friends on here. A ton of people were helped by my things. And so you can see this is just clicking on it randomly, and a lot of my stuff is still up there years and years and years later. And you can see where I go through. This was a junkyard car actually, and so I had a really good shot of everything on it. And anyway, so I wanted to show you a couple other things here. If we go back over to Saturn fans and the S series mods, Now, this is pretty remarkable. If I click here on views and sort by number of views, my how-to article on how to do a fifth gear swap is the most viewed, and I think it might also be the most replied of anything in this forum. And so that's just crazy to me. And so what I was doing here is, just really quickly, if you take the fifth gear assembly out of a single overhead cam Saturn manual transmission and drop it into a dual overhead, it basically gives the car like a sixth gear. It's like a cruising gear, and it really catapults your gas mileage. And so what I was doing here is I did the fifth, and this is called the fifth gear swap. So you take this gear stack and you from the single overhead and you drop it onto the dual overhead cam, and it gives you like a cruising speed, and it really, really helps out your gas mileage. And so what I was doing was I was just selling these. I was going to the junkyard and pulling the gear stacks and selling them. And I say, here, let me know if you're interested. I'll pull it and send it along your way. And so what I would do is I offered free shipping or free installation. And so I sold a ton of these things, and that's exactly how they arrived. And I usually sent a gasket as well, which is right there. I bought a bunch of those gaskets and the nut too. So isn't that remarkable that just me, Joe Schmo, nobody, has the most viewed on this one forum here? So this Saturn Fans forum has been instrumental in helping me get everything done. Okay, I've got the subframe bolts taken out, and so that's loose now. It's going to give me a bunch of extra room to be able to pull this transmission out through the wheel well here. So I think all I've got left are these two upper bell housing bolts. And that thing, oh, I've got my dog bone right here too, so that one needs to come out. Let me get that out of there real quick. I took the steering rack loose, and I took both engine cradle or subframe bolts out, and that's going to give me just enough room to move this thing down and out of the way and give myself enough clearance. As I started doing more and more different types of how-to video, or not videos, but how-to articles on the Saturn forum, I started to make a lot of friends on there and started learning a ton of stuff, and people started to, of course, be excited to help me out and things like that. And I just went through all kinds of different repairs for different cars, and especially things like where a couple people had posted forum discussions and didn't really have all the information in one place. I would go through and I would say, okay, this guy's post or whoever's post, go and look at that, and that's where I got this information from, and that's where I got this information from. And so it was very collaborative, and one of the things I was doing was putting things into one place, which made it nice for people to find, and I had pictures of everything. And so in the how-to library, there's still all kinds of my postings in there. So we'll go and look at those. There's a couple of alignment pins in there too that help to hold it in. I'm going to go down underneath. This thing is heavy for sure. the engine down a little bit. Yeah, we got to put the engine down. Well, this is always a fun maneuver, trying to get that transmission to fall through here. So let's see how we do. It just kind of bends around and squirrels out of here. All right. There it is. There's my Saturn tranny. Okay, now I guess what I'll do is I'll swap over the valve body from the old one to the new one. And I'm pretty sure this valve body was good. I've replaced a lot of these valve bodies, and this transmission was just, it had a crunching and all kinds of awful sounds going on with it. So I'm pretty sure that the transmission itself is blown apart. Now, I can't remember exactly which ones of these bolts need to come out to get this thing to let go, but I'll give it a try. All right, looks like that's it. Yep. Okay, let's see how we do. Okay, so this one wants to go out like that. Goes like that and like this. And then it wants to go back in there like that. Okay. I also wanted to show you on these Saturns, they came in a single overhead and a dual overhead. Now this one's a dual overhead, and the transmissions, whether it's automatic or manual, for both the single and the dual look identical. And so you see that right there. This light is not very good. Hang on a sec. Okay, you see right there where it says MP7. So on the single overhead cam, that would say MP6. And so if you're swapping out these transmissions, you've got to make sure you've got the right one, because they look identical on the outside, they bolt right up. But if you put a single overhead cam transmission, which would be an MP6, if you put that on a dual, it won't work, and you won't know why. So I bought a few Saturns before where they said, oh, we just had the transmission replaced. And I was like, oh yeah, really? And they put the transmission from the wrong engine in. And I pulled it out, put the right one in, and then reused that transmission as well. So a little tip for you. I remember one weekend I was over at Home Depot buying a bunch of plumbing pipes and PVC fittings, and the cashier was in a really good mood. He was just chatting with everybody, and he said, what are you getting into today? And I said, I'm doing some plumbing work under my house. And he said, how do you know how to do all that stuff? And I said, well, I just kind of play around with it and trial and error. And I said, there's also YouTube videos on how to do stuff. And he's like, I need to watch a YouTube video on how to replace the starter in my car. And I said, well, unless it's a Saturn, I can't help you. Otherwise, I can help you. And he said, it's a Saturn. And so I ended up taking, he was a college kid over at NC A&T University, and I ended up taking a used starter over there to his place, and his car was in the parking lot there, and I jacked it up and threw a new starter in it, and I think I charged him like 40 or 50 bucks, and I ended up working on his car for a few years too, keeping it going. Check out this guy. I have not used this in about probably at least 7 years. And so I've got a couple of load levelers here that I used to use for pulling engines. And then check this out. This is what I'm going to use today for getting that transmission back together. Look at that guy. And this was a really nice engine hoist because it's got this air ram on it, so you could like hook up shop air and not have to jack manually. It's super tempting just to grab that transmission and load it up, but it's just too heavy, and so it's definitely a pain to try to get this thing out of storage and everything and set up. Whoops. But there's just no way around it. There we go. Okay, it's hanging pretty nicely now. So I think I need to drop the engine down a bit. Maybe try to meet it. Now this thing is a perfect fit, so it just has to go in there perfectly is pretty much all you have to do. All right, I'm back under here, gonna try to get this flex plate hooked back up. Now this is not fun because right now the flex plate and the torque converter are spinning separately from each other, and so you have to get this thing to line up. And the torque converter is also pushed in quite a bit. See, oh, wait a minute, maybe I don't have the hole lined up right. Oh yeah, I don't think I do. Oh, 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 is that it? Look at that. All right, well there's one. So I think you also need to kind of do this evenly as well when it pulls that torque converter in. But then if these bolts are sticking out, it's not going to help. They're going to get caught anyway, so I don't remember exactly the best way to do this. To tell you the truth. I'm going to try tightening this up and see if it'll draw that in. Yeah, it's pulling the torque converter in. Oh man, look at how far off that mount is. Come on, almost there. Boom. Oh, look at that. That thing is even all the way up in there. Alright, I've got a battery charger on this thing. Let's see if it'll start. Got it on the floor. Alright, well, it started. That's a good sign. Sounds like the fluid's a little bit low. You hear that? Let me top off the transmission fluid. Okay, I topped off the transmission fluid. I think I put in the amount you're supposed to put in for a change, for a fluid change. But when you pull the whole transmission out like that, you drain every last drop out of it. So it took almost 2 gallons. So now I guess we go and take it for a test drive. And so if it runs, if it works, what's going to happen is the computer is going to relearn the shift points, and so it's going to be a awful test drive. Make sure I got brakes here. Well, so far it's moving under its own power. Alright, let's put it in reverse and see if it goes backwards. Hey, look at that. Alright, now I'll take it out on the road and I'll be back with you in a sec. And so what's going to happen now is I'm going to just drive it a little bit, and I should have some really hard shifts. Yep, you feel that? Just like knocking your teeth out. But they should get better and better and better. So what the computer's doing right now is it's relearning the shift points. So there's nobody behind me. I'm going to slow down. There may be some really hard downshifts as well. And then I'll start back out. And the whole time you're going kind of easy here. And that shift from first to second was way smoother than it was the first time. Oh man, feel that? That was a hard one. Oh, that was a hard one too. Okay, so now I'm going to slow back down again. The downshifts don't feel bad. And now we should have some pretty good shifts going through here. Nope, that was still real bad. That one was really smooth. Woo! That was like butter. Alright, here we go. 4th to 5th. Oh, that was kind of hard, but it was a lot sooner than it was last time, so that's good. Alright, I'm going to try to slow down. Okay, I'm going to try starting out again. Oh man, those shifts were good. Still hard, but it was closer to 40 than 50. Alright, I'm going to slow way down again. That was a good shift right there. Oh, that was a good one too. Now we should get one more good one. That was a lot better, a lot better. See, now I'm at 47 miles an hour and I'm at 1900 RPMs instead of 3000. The car's feeling really, really good now. All the downshifts feel really, really good. Oop, car coming. The valve body that was removed from the transmission I just put in this car, I'm pretty sure that was a car I bought and it was shifting really hard and I thought it was the valve body, and I did all the work to replace the valve body, and then I was test driving it just like I'm doing right now, and it was shifting really hard. And I kept thinking, okay, that we got through that hard shift, it should get better, and it never got better. And so the other weird thing is sometimes it would shift smoothly, sometimes it would shift really rough, and I couldn't reproduce the problem. And so oftentimes when you can't reproduce a problem, it's an electrical issue. And so guess what was wrong with that car? The transmission fuse was blown on it. So I replaced the whole valve body and it was a fuse. Alright, I think we're good now though. This thing has got tons of power. It's shifting smooth up and down. Let me just try one more time here. Alright, all the way to a stop. Let's see how we do. Oh, that shift was good. That one was butter. Butter. And that one was good. Alright. I think we've got this transmission fixed. And so when I was working on these cars all the time, I know where all the shift points are, and so I always let up on the gas a little bit to ease into the shift. And so whenever I had a transmission like right now where I think it's good to go, I would always let my girlfriend at the time drive it, because she would just like mash the gas pedal and just, it would make me cringe every time. But if she drove the car and it shifted well, I knew that it was fixed. So I'm going to try to do that a little bit and not be so gentle on those shift points. Oh, and I just hit 284. Alright, I'm going a little bit harder now. Going downhill too, so, but yeah, it's shifting really well. So far so good. Looks looks like I got my Saturn back. I wanted to talk some more about the Saturn forum and some of the things that have helped me over the years. And so the one thing I wanted to start with is just, I guess it's kind of like my ingrained ability to jump into things and not be afraid of failure. And so here's a question, or here's a post where this guy, E-Hunter, was talking about doing some valves and his car was smoking really bad. And everybody just like pounced on his post and was like, this is a really complicated thing. Don't do it, blah, blah, blah. And so then he posts in here, he says in another thread, it was stated that I need to do this. And then the job is not for the faint of heart. And then he says, this is the same thing in this other thread. And the OP, the original poster, gives me the impression that he's also light on experience. But the warning from others about the complexities is not there. And of course, this was my post. And so a Lord of Chaos comes in here and says, I think that's because Sean V has a lot of tools, mechanical experience. Search for thread started by Sean V and you'll find several how-tos. I'm going to guess this is his 12th or maybe 20th S series. And so many of you know that I have a background in science. And in science, when we come across a problem, what we do is we go and we research it, what's known about it, who knows about it, how can we get information about it. And so that's how I approach a lot of things, unknown things. And so I do quickly and somewhat fearlessly jump into things. And so some of this mechanicking stuff was the same thing. And it's kind of funny because looking back at some early postings in the Saturn forum, you can see just how clueless I was. Kind of like with making videos on this channel, if you look back at some of my really early videos. But anyway, I said I have a 2000 engine with an automatic tranny. The flywheel has a few missing teeth. How do I remove this flywheel thing? Now, this is not a flywheel, first of all. This is a torque converter and a flex plate. And so they kind of jump in and they're like, well, you have to remove the flex. It's actually a flex plate and all this and that. And so then I'm like, oops, I guess I need to figure out what's what here. And so this really shows just how clueless I was about working on things and how much the Saturn forums helped me. Here's another one. My SW2 finally hit 200K, and this was back in 2011. And of course, in science, one of the things we do is we give credit where credit is due. And so I said, okay, I was keeping an eye on this. I'm at 199.99 here. And I said, I hit 200,000K. I thought I'd share with everybody. After all, this forum is why the car is still on the road today. And so there I am at 200,000 in 2011. Here's another posting. And this is when this was way back in 2010, I guess. And I had picked up some black badges and some white side markers. And so these are just some more pictures of my old wagon, the one that got me started on everything. And I wanted to share those with you all. This was a pretty interesting one because this is a posting I did in 2010, and I said I just did my first for-hire Saturn repair. And if you read this, there was a Craigslist guy, and he was saying he needed a transmission. And I emailed him and said, okay, what's going on with the thing? And it was slamming into every gear, which was telling me that it was possibly an electrical problem. And so I said, bring it over. It was a beautiful car, 2001 leather, Automagic, beautiful. It's slamming all gears and reverse. And so I said, this might be an electrical problem. I think I can fix it for $100. And so they took off, and I opened up the valve body and tested the pressure solenoid. So this is in the valve body, and it tested way low at 1.4 ohms when it's supposed to be 4.6 ohms. And so I dropped in a used one, put it all back together. They showed back up, and we went and drove the car, and it was completely fixed. So I charged them $100, fixed what they thought they needed a new transmission. It was just a cheap part inside the valve body. So that was pretty cool. My first for-hire Saturn repair job, and it was a success. And then here's a posting, I guess from 2009. This was before I had fixed my 96. So this is a good example of how helpful and useful this Saturn forum was. And so I said, okay, my 96 has got a blown engine. The red wagon, which was the 97 that I had put the new fuel pump in, and I was driving that one had an electrical issue, and I saw smoke coming out of the dash, and the dealership said they want $1,300 to get started. And I was like, what do I do? This thing has got electrical problems. It may need a replacement of the wiring harness, blah, blah, blah. I posted this up here, and within a few hours, the guys were like, oh, it might be an ignition switch. And so RC said, yeah, +1, ignition switch. So, okay, I'm like, what do I even need to do? How do I do this? They tell me how to get it apart, and all it was a wire that had melted due to a bad ignition switch. And so here I say, okay, I went to AutoZone, picked up the replacement fuse and an ignition switch. I taped up the black, replaced the ignition switch. Car runs great now for $60. And so you're talking about a quick and easy repair. And this is how this Saturn forum worked. I would post, or anybody would post a problem, and the guys on this forum would swoop in and tell them exactly what was wrong with it and exactly how to fix it. And so this is just another really good example of how you can use an online community to your advantage and how you can become part of the online community. And what I really focused on was giving back to the community to make it sustainable. And I was doing that with my how-to articles. This is Sean with Gate City, back again. And what I'm working on today is my 2008 Grand Caravan. And so I recently took this thing to Florida and did some scuba diving, and I put new tires on it. And what happens occasionally is when you put new tires on a vehicle, sometimes the bearings are in such bad shape that they'll kind of just like, when you lift up the car, they'll get out of place and it'll start roaring. And so that's what's happening. I think my front wheel bearings are out on this thing. So I took it last night to pick up this kayak that just popped up on Facebook, and I was making a big turn and it started doing some roaring. So I'm going to pull it in here and check the bearings and see how it's doing here. To check the wheel bearing, what we're going to do is we're going to rock the wheel back and forth, which that might also be the tie rod. We'll also rock it like this. And then you can also just spin it and try to listen and feel and see how it does. So look at that. There's a bunch of play in there. And especially if you do it in this plane here or this plane. So these wheel bearings are pretty well shot. So I guess I'm going to replace them. All right, these brake pads are pretty well gone. And like I said, I knew I was getting some grinding and it was on my list. So yeah, look at this. I thought I had just replaced these a few years ago, but boy, they are gone. All right, so next I'm going to hang the caliper out of the way so it's not hanging on the brake line. This thing, the rotor is pretty chewed up too. You can see that edge right there. And so you could get these turned, but I just as soon get new ones. See that edge right there? Right there. So I just as soon get new ones. All right, so here is what we're after. This is our wheel bearing. Okay, let me get some penetrating oil in here. I don't know if it's going to do any good or not. But now that hub should come off of there. It's a hub wheel bearing assembly with a little bit of persuasion. So grab your BFH for this job. Did I just break my screwdriver? Dang it. That's what you get for using the wrong tool. Come on, baby. Probably hard to have a bigger high bar, too. There we go. Okay. All right, there is... What the hell? Look at that. That thing is seized right up. That's weird. Yeah, anyway, this thing is completely gone. No wonder it was roaring. And I mean, it just started. But... Okay, I just got back from the auto parts store. Take a look. This is my new hub assembly. So if I'm holding onto this, that thing spins. And it doesn't spin super easily. You can feel that it's real tight. But it's very smooth as well. This one, same thing, hang on to it right here. And I can't get it to move. So this thing is definitely... Okay, yeah. That thing is... I mean, that is completely gone. It's just like grinding. So I may have messed it up a little bit when I was beating it with that hammer, the BFH. But either way, that's where my roaring was coming from. So let me get this thing all back together. Now, if you live in an area with a lot of corrosion on the roads and stuff like that, you would want to clean this all up. I never have any problems. We live in North Carolina here. We have a pretty fair climate. So I'm just going to shove it all back together and call it a day. Okay, I got all that back together. I did want to show you really quickly. When you go to move it now, it doesn't move, so that wheel bearing is real tight. Now, I do have maybe a tiny bit of play here on the tie rod ends. And the ball joints are real tight. So, yeah, that's a real tight wheel bearing now. That wheel bearing was definitely just completely gone. Okay, let's see how I do on this side. It's usually worth it in situations like this to do both sides. So if you have one wheel bearing go out, or one ball joint go out, or one tie rod end go out, it's always a good idea to do both sides. Just to keep everything symmetrical, even, give yourself a nice baseline starting point and you know where you're at. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm just redoing the driver's side with the new wheel bearing, rotor, and brake pads. Okay, I got that all back together. The last thing I want to do is put my reservoir cap back on. And I didn't show you this, but the fluid level was down to here or so. And so this is one of the reasons you don't want to be topping this off all the time. Because as the fluid level goes down, that means your brake pads are wearing down. And so if this level is low, that may be an indication that your brake pads are ready to be replaced. Okay, now let's take it for a test drive and see how we did. Okay, anytime you mess with your brakes, the pedal's going to be super squishy. So we're going to pump it a few times. Okay, that felt pretty good. It tightened right back up. So that went really well. Oh, And now it's going down a little bit, so let's pump it a little bit more. Okay, I'm good with that. Looks like I could use some gas over here too. But oh yeah, the brakes feel really good. And they feel really smooth. Oh yeah, nice. Okay, I just did my test drive and that thing it's smooth now, so I'm getting this kayak off of here. And I also got a paddle with that boat and then some wheels with it for moving it around. So yeah, I'm pretty excited to get this thing back smooth. It's rolling nicely, it's braking well. Not bad. This is Sean and I am back again working on this Saturn. And so let me show you what happened the other night. I was driving home and all of a sudden my battery light came on and my power steering went out, and then I started overheating. And so what happened here is my belt tensioner, which is right there, that pulley seized up and it threw the belt. And so what I'm going to be working on today is replacing that and replacing the belt. So you can kind of see right there, it's all chewed up and it looks kind of melted. And so the belt came off, and there's the belt right there. So I'm going to work on that today and show you how I'm going to replace that. So the first thing I want to do is chock the wheels on this thing, and I'm going to lift up the engine to give myself a little bit more room to work. I can do it in there, but it's pretty tight. So let me show you a quick trick. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to jack up this side of the engine. I'm going to take these two nuts off of here, off this motor mount, and actually I'm going to take the motor mount out of the way, and that'll lift the engine up and open up this gap right here quite a bit so I can get in there and work. So I've just got a little block on my jack. I'm going to slide it under there, under the oil pan, and I also have the rear wheels chocked on this thing, just because that's a good idea anytime you're lifting stuff up. So let's see if I can get that rolling here. Okay, now we can see a little bit better that tensioner pulley right there, and it's just all chewed up where it's seized up. And if you actually try to spin it, it's not going to spin at all. So that thing is just completely seized up right in there. And so what I'm going to be replacing is the tensioner here, the idler pulley, and the belt. And those three items somewhat go together as a unit, so you can always replace one or the other, but a lot of times those are three things that will go out on these things in terms of your serpentine belt. So to get this tensioner off, I've got two 10 millimeters right here and here, and then I think that's a 13 on that idler pulley. So let me get those going. This is pretty interesting, and I wanted to show you all. This was a video from a few years ago, and somebody was asking about how to take a belt tensioner off, and so let's take a listen. Hey Mike, here's your belt tensioner and how to take it off. This is a Gen 3. Two 10 millimeter bolts, and that's it. And that's all it is. Comes right out of there. Whenever you're working on bolts that are into the block like that, it's always important to use a 6-point socket. And so that's just going to help hold on to the bolt a lot better and reduce your risk of stripping it and rounding it out. So use high quality sockets that are 6-point. Okay, look at that. That thing has just been, it looks like it's been wallowing out for quite a while. Yeah, look at that. So I did hear a sound. I had driven about 45 minutes away and I was hearing a sound that was connected to the engine RPMs. And so I was going to check this thing and it didn't quite make it. So it must have just, the bearing or something blew out. And boy, that thing just got trashed. So there is the old one. And here is the new one. So that is either this thing really wore down or something's going on here. But anyway, let's get this thing installed. That still feels pretty smooth, but I've got a brand new one, so hopefully the new one will be better than that one is. So there you go. Okay, those two are replaced, and now we can put our belt back on. So if you can see in here, when I twist on this nut, it pulls down and releases pressure on that tensioner. So that's what I need to do to get this pulley on, or to get this belt on. So I'm going to release the pressure here, and that's going to let me get it slipped, and that's going to let me get it slipped over top of everything. So now it's kind of halfway on there, and I'm going to get another bite here on this nut. And they do make a special longer handled wrench for this, but on these cars you can kind of wing it. Okay, so I'm just going to start the car up, make sure my belt doesn't fly off before I put it back together, put that motor mount back on. Okay, everything is still on. The car just started up. The battery's kind of weak, presumably because I was driving at night with the headlights on and the battery wasn't charging for a few minutes. But everything is good to go now, so I'm going to put this engine mount back on. And I may stop by the auto parts store and pick up a new one at some point, but for now I want to get this thing going. So these things are, every Saturn I've ever worked on got a new engine mount or motor mount here. And this one is maybe halfway gone. It's probably worth replacing it just for the heck of it. Now I need to drop the jack down and hope that it lands on these studs right here, so that sometimes can be a pain. So you see how that doesn't line up right there, so we just want to tweak it over just a little bit. Try to get that on there on both sides. There it goes. And then I'll finish dropping the engine with the jack the rest of the way. And then a couple of nuts right here, and that's the end of that. Okay, that repair is complete. Alright, we're working on my F550 and I lost all my brake fluid the other day. And upon closer inspection, Carson discovered that I installed this brake pad backwards like 2 years ago. So the piston has been pushing on the brake media here, and it actually wore all the way through. Look at how thin that rotor is right there. And it actually wore through enough that the piston popped out of the caliper, and that's how thick it's supposed to be. So you think I should quit my day job and become a mechanic?
Everybody makes mistakes. Everybody gets one freebie.
Oh boy. Alright, so we're going to replace this gigantic rotor and caliper today. That looks like a heavy sucker.
And it's going to be leading the whole time we got flipped over. So you got...
Big Matt?
Yeah. Maybe double it.
Yeah. You need a hand or you got her? So that rotor's not supposed to look like that, is it?
No. No, it's missing the whole
That's custom right there.
whole side. Took 2 years to get that rotor that way.
Yep.
20 minutes to replace it.
20 minutes, I wish. Just for comparison, that's definitely going on my wall of shame. Oh man.
So you're pushing on the...
Pull it out of there and check it.
Well, yeah, but see, we want to be pushing on this.
Yeah, check it. That's what I'm saying.
Well, it wasn't pushing on that.
You sure?
Yeah. So you want to be pushing. You want to push on that.
Hold that real quick.
Now we're cooking.
No way.
Okay, now here's the other thing. If we hammer that, we're probably gonna bust it. Should we put it in the press? Let's put like a block of, I think that might be our safest bet.
Well, that's scheduled 40, man.
Yeah, if you start hitting with a hammer.
No, we'll be fine. Here.
Yeah, but I think it might be easier too though to put in the press.
That's up to you.
You gotta press. It'd be different if you didn't have.
It's a good thing I don't work with corrugated.
It's like a little spring.
Yep. Holes are blown out. Does that thing get any grease on or anything, or is it just an oil bath?
Yep, just a little bath, and that's got a little O-ring right here that seals it.
Okay. What about that O-ring?
That's actually the spring off the seal.
Oh, okay, good deal. Oh, it's a spring, yeah, I see it now. You kind of have to lift it up like that and get it to go in.
Yep.
Did this help?
Usually they just... It's a good idea.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. That's
that.
it.
I might be a mechanic after all.
Redemption.
Yep.
So you gotta think this right here takes the whole force
Yeah.
of like turning the...
Yeah.
It's all on these little bolts right here.
Yeah. That's pretty crazy. I'm definitely not going to quit my day job and become a mechanic, but Carson bailed me out on this one. This is a picture of me working on Fernando's car last summer, and we got the brakes done, and then we went for a test drive, and we heard an awful grinding noise. And so I called the manager of the Napa, who I just got the brake parts from, and asked her what might be causing this, and she didn't really know. And so I took it back apart, and I found this, and I texted her this picture. And so this picture got circulated all around at the Napa store, and I texted it to my friend Carson, and it got all around. So take a look at this and see what you see is wrong here. Pause the video. Okay, so I did the exact same thing. I installed this brake pad backwards. So this is like the dumbest thing you could possibly do on a brake system. It is so hilarious. And so this picture's been passed around all over the place. I caught a bunch of crap over this. This was really, really funny. So I got the brake pad turned back around, and everything was good to go. And so, like I've said before, I think I'm just going to keep mechanicking for myself. And of course, Fernando didn't have to pay for this work, but we got it done for him. So this is a really hilarious picture. I hope you all have enjoyed learning about how I got into mechanicking. And it's a pretty interesting story. Really, I guess the ability to jump into things and not be too worried about failing at it was a big, big part of it. And so, like I mentioned a few other times, I had a ton of help from others all through the way, either online or in person. And I bet if you go out and ask 10 men if they need help, you'll get 10 no's, I don't need any help. And when people ask me if I need help, I usually say I need all the help I can get. And so I think that's been a big part of my success getting into mechanicking is leveraging the talent that's around me and being able to give back when I can in my own way. And so that brings me to my friend Carson. And you've seen Carson in lots of videos working on my stuff. And you've also seen me down at his property working. And so I met him probably about 10 years ago. He was working at Advanced Auto Parts. And, you know, you meet a lot of DIYers there, and that's what I was doing, working on my Saturns all the time. And we got to know each other. He works at a local shop as well. And he had done some of my more intense stuff. I'd taken my stuff down to his place, and he helped me work on it. And then once he got his property, I started going down there with my excavator and my skid steer and helping him with some of the developing that he's been doing down there. And so then he finally started coming here to work on stuff. So I joke around that was really hard to get him to come here instead of having to go to him. And so he's been a huge, huge asset for me for keeping all my equipment and trucks and everything running. And you've seen him in my videos. He knows how to do everything. So he's a really great mechanic. So I guess with that, I will go ahead and end this video, and let me know in the comments if you are a DIYer, a mechanic, or if you graduated from YouTube University in mechanicking, or if you're interested in getting into mechanicking. All right, thanks for watching. Thanks again for watching, and I'm going to place my mechanicking video where I was working on my King Rancher just there for you. So I'll see you on the next one.